Welcome to a homegrown family podcast where we grow the produce and the kids. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a homegrown family podcast. I'm your host, Joe Metler, and wowza, I feel like it's been a little while, but hey, some things like family, my wife, my kids, my real job, and God are also all more important things than this podcast for me. So I appreciate you guys who are coming back on, sticking through all of life events to come here again today to listen to this podcast. I appreciate you guys coming back and listening, and I definitely have a few returning listeners every episode, it seems like, so kudos to you guys who keep on listening to this. But also, kudos to those of you guys who are listening for the first time. As you can kind of get to listening to this podcast or this, homegrown family podcast, it's kind of covers a variety of different topics and things. I'm going to be talking about dehydrators here today, and I've talked about hunting in the past, fishing in the past, talking about mushrooms and foraging and raising sheep, and we're going to have an episode coming here soon on maple syrup. So, I'm just kind of a podcaster wannabe, I guess. I don't know. But I record these episodes to kind of create a little archive of happening events for myself and family members. I've had my grandparents on these episodes. My grandma was 99 years old on the previous episode talking about food preservation. So that's kind of an interesting episode. You should listen to that one. But appreciate you guys, all your support, our comments, messages, things like that. If you haven't done so, if you'd like to, please rate the podcast. It helps reach more people. It kind of gets it to the top of the list when people are sorting through and looking for keywords and all that type of stuff. If you would like to support the podcast monetarily, you can click on the link below. It says support the show. It brings you to mycoffee.com or something similar to that. I can't remember the exact name of it, but you're able to donate a cup of coffee. $5, $10, one-time deal type of thing. Encourage you to support the show. I don't really get paid for these episodes. It's kind of all my own free time. And like I said, it's not my real job. So there you have it. I mentioned my grandma's episode here last time, but a lot of my episodes are kind of like reoccurring because they're not episodes that are based upon political events or things happening around the climate of this culture. Right? These episodes are, for example, last year around this time in the spring, I had an episode called Seeds and Such. It's a great episode talking about many different things, from starting your own seeds to doing all sorts of different things with gardening, right? And we've had other episodes called Where Out Our Garden. If you're looking to put a garden on your property but don't know where to put it, that's a good episode to take a look at. And that episode's relevant every single spring or every single winter, things like that. So if you're new to the podcast, to look at those old episodes, and I'm sure you'll find something that interests you. And so that's what I was talking about, other kudos. Kudos to those of you guys who just come in and listen and pick and choose what you want to listen to. I'm not a podcaster, everybody. I don't gain a lot of followers because I don't follow one narrow mindset path, podcast. I have a variety of different things. So there you have it. There's my spiel. Support the podcast, rate the podcast, and now let's get into it. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about selecting a dehydrator. So my wife Nora and I are kind of wanting to get into dehydrating foods. Some of the things that come to mind are herbs, making some jerky, dehydrating some apples, fruit leather, that's a big one that my wife's interested in. And so kind of some different ways that we can help preserve food in this, day and age, right? It's a little bit different than what my grandma did, if you listen to that episode, right? And so I was thinking about trying to make this episode a little bit more interesting than just me saying, hey, this is what I want in a dehydrator and this is what I got. Ultimately, that's what this episode is going to be about. But I kind of just want to relate it a little bit to dating and relationships. Oh boy, where's he going with this, right? So my wife, once told me that, I had a checklist that I needed to complete for the person I was going to date or the person I was going to marry. And you managed to cross all of them but like one. So, didn't do too bad, right? So each of us have our own things that we desire or look for in relationships, right? Similarly, I'm going to have things that we desire or want in a dehydrator, okay? So bear with me on this. But, in your dating checklist, your marriage checklist, your husband, your wife checklist, for women, it might be you want tall, dark, and handsome, right? To throw that out there. Maybe you want to have someone that also wants country living, or you want a city slicker, live in the big New York or something like that. You got to be able to mesh and have similar views of life, right? So I want to find a dehydrator that meshes with my goals and aspirations and what I want to accomplish. I don't want to get an oversized dehydrator if I really only need, 5 square feet of drying space because I only do small batches kind of thing, right? So there might be certain things that you look for in a relationship, and then there's certain things you're going to look for in a dehydrator. And so just a disclaimer here too is that not everybody's dehydrating needs or equipment or the dehydrator itself are the same, right? They each have something different to offer, and everybody's goals and aspirations are different, to small batches to large batches, to meat to veggies, to all these different things. Everybody has looking for something different. Similar to your relationship. Someone might be looking for an extrovert that really likes to go out on the town. Another one might be looking for, the next generation of grandma who loves to sew and knit and, work that sewing machine type of thing, right? That was my wife. My wife once told me, just to let you know, I'm kind of a grandma at heart. And I'm like, oh yeah? It's like, yeah, I like to sew, read, knit, and that's kind of my hobbies. I'm like, hey, I'm a grandpa in some ways. So everybody's looking for something different. So I don't claim this podcast episode to be the end all be all for this is the type of dehydrator you need to get because there's nothing better. Okay. That's not the case. There's going to be many different hydrators for many different people. And this is kind of how I succumbed to what dehydrator Nora and I wanted. So there are, I think we basically had 4 non-negotiables when it came to a dehydrator. Some non-negotiable, something that needs to be on the list that they have to cross, right? They have to write in that check mark for these couple things. For some people, that's probably, morals and standards, right? Oftentimes when it comes to relationship things, with God, right? You want to have, sometimes similar person of similar faith, that might meet your checklist. You might want someone that's also Baptist. You might want someone that's also Lutheran or Catholic, right? That eventually was kind of a thing on my checklist. I went through, a couple different dating relationships where I was dating, evangelicals or this and that. For those of you guys who don't know, I am Catholic, okay? That's how it is. And that's how it always will be. So when I started dating individuals of other faiths, I couldn't really make it work. And ultimately, when we start getting serious or something like that, it's like, or before we even get serious, right? That we need to make that decision and say, yeah, it's not going to work out for me. So that's something that might be a non-negotiable on somebody's list. Another non-negotiable might be, hey, I'm allergic to dogs, so this person cannot be a dog lover. Those non-negotiables, right? I could probably think of a couple others right off the bat here. Oh yeah, we want someone to be athletic, because you're into running and rock climbing and this type of thing. That's got to be on the checklist, Or you really are a bookworm and just love diving into theology and, all this, historic stuff. So you want to also find a fellow nerd, right? so those are things that are on the checklist, right? They're non-negotiables. So for Nora and I, when it came to the dehydrator, we wanted stainless steel trays. So we wanted stainless steel trays and a rear-mounted fan. Count that as our number 1 non-negotiable, is that we want stainless steel trays and a rear-mounted fan. I didn't want to worry about rotating trays around to try to get even drying and things, and from what I researched, it sounds like that rear-mounted fan would really accomplish that more even drying than what you would have with other styles of fans, like the bottom-mounted or top-mounted fan. And then my wife and I wanted stainless steel. We didn't want to have to worry about, plastics, the microplastics, all this type of stuff getting in anything or whatever. So we wanted stainless steel trays. And one thing I noticed when we were looking at types of trays people have, it was sometimes advertised as stainless steel, but when you look on the fine print, it said chrome-plated. We wanted to avoid those also. So we avoided the chrome-plated ones and went with stainless steel. And that one non-negotiable pretty much eliminated a lot of different styles, like your round style, like your Weston, your Cuisinart, your Nesco brands. And not saying that those are bad. Those are very good, dehydrators for small batches of things where you could get pretty even in drying. But if you get, 10 different Nesco circular trays on top of each other, you're going to have to take the top and the bottom and mix and match until they dry evenly. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep it simple, straightforward, easy peasy, right? And then stainless steel trays are often also dishwasher safe, which I don't even have a dishwasher. I'm not sure why it's all on the checklist, but for many of you, it is on the checklist, okay? You guys want your dishwasher, okay? So I want a dishwasher safe. So most or all stainless steel are dishwasher safe. A lot of plastic ones can or can't be, depending on what you research, right? And then I'm always one that looks at money, right? So cost kind of plays a factor, but also in the cost of the dehydrator is what are the provided accessories and capabilities of the dehydrator? So is it going to include silicone mats? Is it going to include fruit leather trays? Is it going to, include a recipe guideline type book with it or anything like that? So that all played a factor, because if 2 dehydrators cost $200 a piece, but one provides 8 silicone mats and 2 fruit leather trays and this and that, and the other one doesn't include any of that, okay, so which one's really cheaper, right? Or which one's really more bang for your buck? So I love garage sales, Garage sales, like the other day, even Facebook Marketplace, I bought 40 dress shirts for $36. Or actually, the other way around, 36 dress shirts for $40. And I was like, heck, they're even my size, so I bought them. I'm only keeping like 6, and the rest are going to go to my brothers. And for those of you guys who haven't listened, I have like 5 younger brothers, right? Someone's going to be able to wear those shirts. So I'm a deal seeker, right? Try to find the best deal I can get with the best quality that I can find. However, I don't know if that applied to my dating relationships, because I definitely didn't want to find the best bang for my buck. Okay. But I did want to find the best quality that I could find. And that oftentimes in the dating world is a lot harder than, unless someone just falls in your lap. For me, I met my wife at a wedding of a mutual friend. It was kind of just on a silver platter. And we danced the night away, and next thing you know, first date happened. Actually, if you want to know more about how we met, my wife and I met, it's kind of a funny story. You can go to the episode Keep It Weird, and it goes through that whole deal, how we first started dating and how I was a wimp and didn't even get her number, so. This day and age, dating was a lot different than it was even 20 years ago. But, so those are my top 2, right, of my 4 non-negotiables. The third non-negotiable was I wanted flexibility in uses. And so flexibility in uses will mean, I wanted a pretty good temperature range, as max that I could find online. And I wanted extended timer capabilities. If I'm going to be drying something for 24 hours plus, I don't want a timer that stops at 24 hours. I want to be able to keep this thing going. Once I get my recipes put in place and everything, I want to be able to put the timer on and boom, go to it. So I wanted to have extended timer capabilities and then also large temperature range. When I was looking and researching these different dehydrators, the temperature range that I found seemed like it was from 95 degrees to 165. It was pretty common. And I was looking for one that was less than 95 or even had an ambient air capability, because from what I understand, the lower temps you can go when it comes to herbs and raw living foods like your sourdough and your yogurt and stuff, the lower temperature you go, that will still promote good drying, will result in, better color. It might retain that green color. It will retain more nutrients if it's less hot. And granted, yeah, it does extend your drying time a little bit more, but it also retains more flavor, right? And so from what I heard from somebody who did a lot of dehydrating of garlic, they said that the lower temperature is longer if you can do it, because it retains that flavor, right? So I was looking kind of having that ambient air temperature capability, which I guess by the time you get to 70, 80 degrees, what's 15 more degrees? But yeah, so that's kind of what I was looking at. And so, herbs should be dried around 95, according to what I've been finding. Along with your raw and living food should also be 95. But I wonder if that 95 cutoff isn't just because that's the range of the dehydrators available for the most part. I only found one brand that actually went lower than 95, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit here. Your meats are 145 to, 62 degrees Celsius for those who are outside the United States and use the metric system. That 95 degrees is 35 degrees Celsius. And then chickens, up to 160. So the max temperature I was finding was 166, 165, which from all research I could find was fine. I wouldn't need to dry any more than that. And then the lower temperatures was around that 95 degrees or 35 degrees Celsius. So it's kind of what I was finding. For the most part, it was pretty similar. But we'll get into more of the differences of my findings here in a second. But when you start relating that back to your relationship checklist, somebody has a wide temperature range, right? You don't want someone that's always blowing their fuse and always running at 140 to 165 degrees nonstop all the time, right? Yeah, it decreases the drying time sometimes and makes things more exciting and more fun, but might oftentimes reduce the nutrients of the relationship. The vitamin A and vitamin C are a little bit heat sensitive, so certain things, just might not quite work out as well, So, but on the other hand, if you get something that's a little bit hot and spicy, it creates crispier foods like, veggie chips and kale chips and, zucchini chips and things like that. So, if you've got someone that runs hot, there might be certain things in the relationship that go well. But I venture to say that someone who has flexibility and can have low temperatures and high temperatures is a pretty good thing because it helps keep your emotions in check, help keep the relationship in check. Personally, I'm a little bit more even keel along the road. I usually don't have low lows and I usually don't have high highs. I'm pretty mellow, realistic, type of individual. And so I oftentimes, don't show my emotions a lot. And so sometimes I think Nora has a hard time reading me but on the stability in the relationship, right? Where she might be a little bit more emotional. Maybe that's because she's female. I don't know. I'm sure everybody's relationship's a little different, okay? But she'll kind of gauge the relationship status per se and how we're doing. If I want to figure out how that relationship's going, just figure out how her mood is and we'll go from there. And then extended timer capabilities. I'm not sure exactly how to relate that to relationship, but that's how it goes. So, the last thing that I had on my non-negotiable list was easily ordered replacement parts and the length of the warranty. So you're probably thinking, where is it going with this when it comes to relationships, okay? For me, I take the Catholic standpoint on marriage and the warranties for life, okay? Every warranty I found on dehydrators was anywhere from a year to 5 years, some completely comprehensive, some not. That's kind of what I found. Easily reorderable replacement parts. I want to be able to go online to the website and I want to be able to say, oh, I need a new fan, fix it myself. Oh, I need a new heating element, fix it myself. I want to have the ability to keep my dehydrator running as long as possible. I don't want to have to go out and buy a new one. I want to keep this one solid, this one good. Like in a relationship, you're going to want to mend the broken parts of your relationship. You're going to help, your wife or your spouse or your husband heal as you guys grow together, right? So that's what I also wanted in this dehydrator, is I wanted this dehydrator to be able something that I can have for a long, 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 long time. This is probably a bad joke, but I was just thinking something that I'm going to use and abuse and wear out and use again and keep washing and get repaired parts, and keep it going for the rest of its life, right? So, that was pretty bad. Anyways, bear with me. You get my point, I think. And then, when it comes to other things in my relationship checklist, I had absolutely nots on my checklist, like smoker. My girlfriend, my spouse could not be a smoker, okay? It just was one of those things that was on my absolutely not checklist. If it was a smoker, I'm out. I'm done. If I would have met Nora that night and I got a little whiff of smoke, oof, nope, yep, sorry. Adios. I didn't really think I had that when it came to a dehydrator. It had the things, non-negotiables that I needed, but I didn't think I had any absolutely nots. And yeah, I did have one absolutely not. I did not like the French door style. The door that opens up left and right and kind of opens wide open. To me, that seemed kind of silly, because if I want to pull out my tray, I don't want to have to go up all the way and clear the doors. I want to be able to take it out and slide it to one direction or another. So I really didn't want to have these French doors. And one of the dehydrators that has stainless steel model, the only stainless steel model they had was one with French style doors. And that was the Excalibur brand. The Excalibur brand, I heard all the good things about. My friend that did the garlic recommended the Excalibur brand. My wife wanted an Excalibur brand. So that's what I was kind of looking into, and I just did not like the French door style. It was $160, so it wasn't terrible. But the 8 trays said stainless steel, but then they also kind of mentioned chrome plated somewhere in that Excalibur dehydrated brand. So kind of crossed that one off the list. Another brand that I kind of looked at was the Meat brand. My brother-in-law uses the Meat brand. He's used it for a lot of different things, other than dehydrators even. And he doesn't complain about it, has pretty good success about it. And once he finds a brand that's good, I can pretty much trust him and know that's going to be good. Had stainless steel trays, had a decent temperature range. It actually went down to 90 degrees, up to 167. So it had a pretty good, decent, temperature range. The 6 tray version was $150. A 10 tray version was $300. But I couldn't easily find information on their website about replacement parts. Or warranty, actually. So that went off my list. I wanted something that I could get replacement parts for. I don't want the motor to go bad and be like, oh, great. Nah, I just scrap it and just get a brand new one, right? Which, if I have money, sure, but not something I wanted to really putz with, so I took that one off the list. So now I had to start kind of being picky and take a look, at my negotiables, my absolutely not list, and kind of narrow it down a little bit, right? So I had to start flirting with the internet a little bit more and trying to figure out which dehydrator do I want, which dehydrator do I like best? Do I like the blonde or brunette? Do I like the tall or the short or athletic? Kind of depending on what you're looking for, right? So other things that kind of helped play a role in my decision were square foot of drying space. And I was thinking to myself, of the style and sizes that I'm using, probably bigger the better, right? But one of my coworkers said, well, if you get for example, if you get like a 10 square foot dehydrator, that's dehydrating space, total dehydrating space. If I get that one, compared to a 6.5 square foot dehydrator space, and I'm only doing a couple trays, a couple small batches, and I'm only taking up like 50% or less, or a quarter of the dehydrator space, it's a lot of wasted energy not doing anything. He kind of told me like, hey, well, if you get a smaller one, then you can always just run 2 batches, right? But you're being efficient with your batches. You're not just burning, kilowatts, right? So that was kind of an interesting take on that. And another thing as I was kind of looking at, but I wasn't too crazy about, was the amount of watts that I was putting out. Like, the more watts that your dehydrator has, the faster it's going to get up to temperature, perhaps the less time it's going to take to dry. And the more watts it has, the more energy it uses. But it was pretty standard. It kind of ranged anywhere from like 550 to 750. And majority of them were close to 600 to 650. So there wasn't a lot of differences in there for that. I also looked at reviews and ratings. I wanted like at least a 4-star plus, hopefully a 4.5 or plus better, right? And then price overall, and then any size and dimensions. Size and dimensions vary a little bit. What I've noticed is that it seems like all the dehydrators, are mostly that square body style that I was kind of looking at this point, pretty much has the same footprint, but your dryable space varies based on that footprint. Or not really, not based on that footprint, because they all have the same footprint. They just have more space for ambient air and fans and things like that comparatively to each other. So, anyways, that's kind of other things that I took into consideration. So, of course, all of what I mentioned is kind of pretty small potatoes when it came down to it. Some combination had to be made to make a conclusion to narrow down what I wanted and what brand we were going to get, right? So I kind of narrowed it down to 3 different brands, and I'll post these in the show notes so you guys can, and links to the actual device or whatever, the dehydrator, so that way you can take a look at it yourself if you'd like. So I narrowed it down to the Magic Mill Pro Food Dehydrator, the MFD 1098 model. And then the Bench Foods Premium Domestic Dehydrator, which was from a commercial dehydrating company who's finally brought to market their own personal countertop dehydrator, which I thought was interesting. It's relatively new, for them, that company, to make a smaller size. But I thought there was some certainty in a commercial dehydrator that had put out good quality. And then you have the Lem Big Bite 10 tray stainless steel dehydrator. And they have a bigger version too, like a 16 tray. But I was looking at the 10 tray because I didn't think I needed to have that much dehydrating space. And so, yeah, I'll post a link to all 3 of these dehydrators in the show notes. And I'll say, although I ultimately selected one, I don't think that you can go wrong with selecting any of these 3 dehydrators. If you're willing to spend up to $200 to $300 or $150 if you get them on sale type of thing, I don't think you can go wrong with any one of these dehydrators. I think they're all very good dehydrators. They all have their pros and cons. So now I'm gonna go pull up my my handy dandy Excel spreadsheet. With all those different things I was looking at, I went and so I have a column here for these 3 different dehydrators. Column 1 says stainless steel. Yes, yes, yes. That was a non-negotiable. They had all those, right? They met my morals and standards of life. With a rear-mounted fan. They all had rear-mounted fans. They all had the similar outlook on life. And I think they're all going to meet the basic need of not having to rotate, trays and be able to have stainless steel outlook and appliance. So then the next thing I was kind of looking at was price, right? The Magic Mill 1098, was $200, $199. Actually, it's on sale right now, I think, for like a spring special for like $170. And then the bench foods tray was on sale for $240 when I was looking, but it's typically $400. I think you can actually still get it for like $220 right now currently. And the Lem Big Bite 10 tray was also $200. So I'm sitting here looking at the price. They're basically ranges from $200 to $240. By the time you incorporate the accessories that were included in the purchase, it was pretty much almost even. The Lem 10 Bite had basically just a standard drop pan, stainless steel, and 10 trays. It didn't really include anything else. So that's, $200. The Bench Foods 10 tray had a steel drip pan, 8 silicone mesh mats, 2 silicone, solid mats, and a 5-year comprehensive warranty. They all had 5-year warranties actually, but this is the Bench Foods one was the only one that had the 5-year comprehensive. And I called them up and they had 24/7 support, and they have basically they'll send somebody in to come fix it for you. Whereas some of the other warranties might be more like, oh, I'll give you send you a spare part repairs, send you a part, and might not have necessarily someone in to come fix it. So for $240, you got more than $40 worth of extra mesh mats and solid mesh mats and stuff like that. So pretty much the same thing as the Lem. And then the Magic Mill had 2 mesh trays, 2 fruit leather trays, which nothing else had fruit leather trays, and that was kind of important in order to be able to get a thicker fruit leather rather than like a roll-up style or silicone, solid mat. And so that was kind of, incorporated some things there. So that was maybe a little bit less than $200 by the time you took a grand scheme of things. Anyways, plus or minus $20 probably by the time you incorporate the accessories and stuff. So not really much difference there. More of a preference of what you wanted to get, right? Except for when it comes to Lem Big Bite, you probably have to purchase all your extra stuff to get started. Temperature range. The Magic Mill was 95 to 176, so a little bit on the higher end. Lem Big Bite was the same way, but the Bench Foods was 70 degrees all up to 195, so it had a lot wider range in temperature range. But then, like I kind of mentioned, it sounds like most things only need to get to like 165, and most, from what I can find, 95 is kind of the base of what you need to do for the lowest temperature setting. So I don't know, even though it was a non-negotiable for me or something I was looking for was diversity of, flexibility of use, I don't know if the temperature makes a big difference. But if I was going to do it based on that, it would be the Bench Foods dehydrator. Timer range, the Magic Mill and the Big Lem Bite are almost the exact same. 30 minutes all the way up to 48 hours. And then the Bench Foods 10 tray was 1 hour all the way up to 99 hours. So the Bench Foods, has a lot wider ranges for time too, but I don't know if hardly anything takes longer than 48 hours to dry. So how much do you need that? You're paying for the flexibility if you're paying full price anyways, like around $400. But if it's on sale, it's pretty comparable and you get more flexibility. Overall square foot of drying space, the Magic Mill had 8.3 square foot, and then the Lem Big Bite had almost 10, and the Bench Food only had 6.5. The stainless steel mesh size for those three were Magic Mill at 3/8 of an inch, Bench Foods at 5/8 of an inch, and Lem Big Bite at 3/8 of an inch. I think the 5/8 of an inch, a little bit of difference, does help, when you're drying slices of fruit and stuff to not make it fall through and things. But that's also why they have the silicone mesh mats too. So I don't know if the mesh size really has much to do with it or not, but it can play a factor, right? I don't think I need a 10 square feet of drying space, but 6.5 seemed a little low. The Magic Mill is 8.3. And then horsepower was kind of another one of those things I was kind of looking at. The Magic Mill is 600 horsepower, 4 to 5 decibels of sound. So it sounded like that was supposed to be pretty quiet. Bench Foods had 750 watt capacity, but according to their website, it runs an average of 375, so lower wattage, might take longer to dry, but then it takes less energy to run. So that's not a bad thing. So yeah, that was good. And then 35 decibel sound on the Bench Foods dehydrator, so super quiet from the reviews. And then you had the Lem Big Bite 10 tray, which was 800 watts. So a little bit more power in the Lem Big Bite with more space. So between that and not having, the other accessories included, looking at the website for Lem, it seemed like it was mostly meat-based, even though they say it's, dehydrated for everything. Their entire website's, based on grinders and packagers and air seal, vacuum sealers and things like that. So, I just thought that was a better idea to take the Lem Big Bite off my list. Mostly because it seemed like you could get heating elements on the website, but not all sorts of different spare parts. And then you had the Bench Food tray, which seemed like it crossed most of the things off my list. It had great warranty, had lots of accessories, had a range of temperature, range of timer. But Menora really wanted the fruit leather tray, so I didn't think there was much of a difference between doing that and the Magic Mill. So ultimately, we got the Magic Mill, and so far, I would say it would have been nice to have a little bit smaller mesh size, to that 3/8 of an inch. Or sorry, to that 5/16 of an inch rather than 3/8 on the metal stainless steel screens. That way I wouldn't need to get, use the plastic mesh trays, as much. Because that kind of defeats the purpose of having stainless steel if you have to use the mesh trays to make sure things don't fall through. So, yeah, other things about the Magic Mill that I ended up going with, it did have overheat protection, which wasn't always advertised in the other two, Bench Foods or Lembic Bite. But you wouldn't think that dehydrators have to have like an overheat protection. One thing I'd say that Magic Mill did really well too on their website when I was looking is that you can buy basically all the individual parts separately online. Bench Foods one was really good for that too. You were able to buy a lot of the things individually online, but it seemed like it was super easily done with the Magic Mill. So there you go. That's what I'm looking for in a dehydrator. Ultimately went with the Magic Mill, kind of middle of the road square footage, average $200 price. Temperature range went from 95 to 176, which I felt like was basically the effective range. We'll see. Time will tell if I decide that I should have went with something that had a larger range or not. But overall, yeah, that's what we went with. And then, I've had a chance to use it for some jerky and some fruit leather and all sorts of different things, and that's going to be saved for another episode. Yeah, so again, my top three were the Lembic Bite 10 tray coming in at third, the Bench Foods 10 tray from the commercial producer coming in at number 2, and that's another reason why I didn't go with Bench Foods, is that it was coming from a commercial producer, which I thought was good, high quality stuff, but the first model of it coming out, I'm sure there's going to be some quirks with it that they're going to improve or fix upon. So I that's kind of primarily why I didn't end up going with Bench Foods. And then the Magic Mill just seemed a little bit more user-friendly. Yeah, so the Magic Mill was number 1, the 1098 Magic Mill model. So there you have it. Too bad. Too bad in the dating world you can't narrow it down to 3 and choose what you want. But you do have the ability to be selective in who you want, right? You don't need to choose somebody who's toxic. You don't need to choose somebody who's needy or too self-centered. I don't know. I guess I didn't have a way of summarizing this podcast into a dating checklist or anything like that, but know that you're worth it. Your body and you are valuable, and it doesn't deserve to be abused or used by others. And those of you who are still looking for, love at the end of the rainbow, don't be discouraged. There's always time, and everybody's time's different, and God has a plan. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll have another episode coming up on here on my experiences with the Magic Mill dehydrator and how I think it's been going so far. That's coming up soon, probably the next couple episodes or whatnot. So again, please rate the podcast if you enjoy these episodes, or if you don't. But 5 stars are appreciated. And then if you'd like to support the podcast, click that link below, support the show. And then you can find me on Instagram at @homegrownfam. You can also email me at homegrownfam@gmail.com if you have any questions. Yeah, I'm just getting into this dehydrating thing, so I'm looking forward to taking this journey with you guys to kind of share my, this did not work out stories, and to share my, this turned out really nice. Stay tuned for all of that, and wish you all the best in both checklists.